Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast. Joining us today from Locked On Utes, it is JT Wistrcill, who is the host of Locked On Utes, covers the University of Utah, right? Is that Utah University? University of Utah.
University of Utah. Yeah,
there we go. On today's show, we'll take a look really at the idea of Utah joining the Big 12. And JT, glad to have you on. We'll start first with some of your impressions about some of the latest news. And really, I just wanted to start a series where I'm going to talk to all of our hosts who cover Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and ASU and kind of get their thoughts. But I think a fun part of it, too, is this is all playing out in real time. And so, like, the latest piece of news that we got yesterday, and a place where I want to start is the idea of Apple not being really a savior, but being a potential television partner for the Pac-12, and your thoughts on what that would be, what that would look like, and do you like that? Because I think the number one thing with Utah is that they're getting recognition. They're getting eyeballs because they're playing and winning Pac-12 championships, and they're playing in Rose Bowls. So their visibility is climbing, and I think they're in a pretty unique spot that, this is a program that's on the up. I know Kyle Whittingham's not going to be around for much longer, it sounds like, right? He talked about not wanting to coach until he drops dead. But like the program as a whole is on the rise, and they just joined the Pac-12, not just, but recently.
Yes.
Winning the league. They're going to Rose Bowls. Visibility's up. So thoughts about an Apple TV deal, considering it's a streaming partner and they don't have a linear cable channel.
Well, first, great to be on with you, Josh. And also further, just the Pac-12. I mean, part of me thinks like, Pac-12 football streaming sounds fun when I first hear that, right? Like on Apple, like there's something fun about that. But then I think what's the biggest problem with the Pac-12? No one especially the East Coast, they don't really care and they don't really watch it. Putting it on a streaming service instead of having it where like late Saturday night, I'm scrolling through channels. Oh, Pac-12 After Dark's on. I'm going to click on that. Putting it on a streaming service will make it even worse. So to me, as much as there's some excitement in being like, oh, I could go like my team's games are on a streaming service. Like there's something fun about that. But like, I think visibility wise, it's actually really bad for the conference. Cause like I said, I think a lot of just the casual college football fans will fall even more out of touch with the Pac-12, which I think is really a negative thing for the conference as a whole. So look, if maybe once a year they played, I'll be honest, I don't even have Apple or TV right now. So I would need to go over and buy it then. And I know there was a lot of reporting by Andrew Marchand of the New York Post about like the pricing and everything for it, like how many games would be played on it in that scenario thing. I mean, the whole we'll talk about it in a second, sure. But this is, it's tough for the Pac-12 right now, the way the media is shaking out with CBS not wanting to be there. It's like all your friends are like kind of slowly but leaving you, and then you're just going to end up with whatever, maybe ESPN's going to be able to lowball them or whatever it is. But I mean, it's not great, Josh. That's for sure right now.
Yeah.
For the Pac-12.
Well, Andrew Marchand, he's been on the podcast and he's all over this, and he and John Oran have done a great job with their coverage of this. It's difficult because the one thing you can tell, and I understand this, and I think one part that some people have lost sight of, kind of in this Big 12 Pac-12 fight is that ideally everybody kind of wants to remain where they are, right? Like,
yes.
And that's kind of the reality, but nobody wanted to lose UCLA and USC, and nobody in the Big 12 wanted to lose Texas and Oklahoma. There might be animosity now. I saw Jamie Pollard from Iowa State's comment where he said they can't leave soon enough about, Texas's game, Texas Iowa State playing on the Longhorn Network. And
wild.
I understand that, but like it does suck that they're leaving because they did have a pretty large financial impact, right? They did a very, very large scope, large impact. And, the same thing for USC and UCLA. And ideally, once again, like everybody wants to remain where they are, but this is major college athletics. And, it looks like at this point, some people are going to be left behind at some point in time. And if you're presidents and AD, and I'm not sure what the structure is, I know every school is kind of different, right? Every school, there's schools that have board of regents. There's schools where the presidents are making the call. There's schools where it's maybe the AD and the board of regents and a president making the call. But if you're a decision maker, you just don't want to be left without a chair in this game of musical chairs. And I think Utah is desirable because of where they are right now. You and I actually talked before. It's nice to feel wanted, but I think the end result everybody is hoping for is everybody can remain where they are and make money where they are, which that's the reality. I'm not sure that's going to happen everywhere.
You hit the nail on the head, Josh, when you said, like, honestly, as a Utah fan, like, I want to stay in the Pac-12. Like, but I wanted USC and UCLA to stay. Like, it's something fun about, even when their brands are down, there's just something fun about playing those teams because you love beating them. It's the same thing with Texas and Oklahoma, right? Everyone loves to play Texas and Oklahoma, especially Texas of the more recent years. Oklahoma, this most recent year after Oklahoma was kind of cleaning up the conference for a while. Like, you get up to play the big brands because it's fun. It's why, and they draw attention too. I mean, Duke and North Carolina weren't even ranked. I still tuned into Duke Carolina. It's a tradition. Like, you do it every year, and it's great for the ACC that they get that many eyeballs on it. So, yeah, it's unfortunate that this is the position that everyone's really in college football, where you do kind of have to put and do what's best for you. And that's what really interesting. And I'm really interested to see like how Utah weighs all those decisions and looks at it going forward. I'm someone I feel like the long-term future of college football is to kind of super conferences. Basically, I just feel like that's eventually where we're going to end up. It still feels like it's a few years down the road, but also I don't know that. So I feel like if Utah were to stay in the Pac-12, that they put themselves in a good position to be selected for a super conference eventually. But look, if the super conference doesn't come, then the best move for them very well may be going to the Big 12, because you look at the way things are shaking out right now. And Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, but what is it, 38 million per year in the media rights deal?
Yeah, well, the television number by itself is going to be 31.6, but I think once you start adding the additions of, once you start pouring all the money on about what you make per year, NCAA tournament, bowl appearances, CFP, it's going to end up more towards, I think, 50. For them in all told, but the television number strictly is 31.6. I want to say 31.2, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, and I mean, look, the Pac-12, look, in terms of Oregon, Washington, and you just said like all the guys you're having on, basically the hosts, right? Like, this is the reason that they're attractive and they offer stuff. I think they provide value, but is the Pac-12 going to be able to get that 30 million deal? I mean, it's looking less and less likely with the more people drop out CBS. I mean, you're shaking your head too, anyways.
No,
that it seems really hard to believe. So it does feel like the best term for them to make the most money in the short term, it feels like, is going to the Big 12, if we're being honest. But as I said, I think then you also got to weigh like, well, what does the future of college football look like? And I believe they're set up even better to win right now in the Pac, just in terms of they know the teams, they know the conferences, and they come in, it's going to be tough. The one thing for me personally that really appeals about joining the Big 12, I will say, is I really love playing BYU. I just, even when you look, and most recently they beat us too, like, but I love rivalries. Like, that's what everyone loves that weekend after Thanksgiving, right? When we get Ohio State, Michigan, Auburn, Alabama, all the great rivalries that make college sports, the passion is what makes college sports so great, right? So that part of it really gets me excited. But I said too, I hope that Utah is able to make something work in the Pac-12, but if they go to the Big 12, I'm not going to be like kicking rocks and really disappointed. I think there's a lot of exciting things about joining the Big 12, and it's, as you said, it's nice to be wanted because there's a lot of appeal to having Utah in your conference right now in terms of the brand and what they've been able to build and establish coming off back-to-back Rose Bowl appearances.
Are we still calling it the Holy War? Are we still allowed to call it that?
It's funny, like, cause I got backlash for that once, and in a media thing I did, and then everyone else will like still call it that on Twitter, but then someone got mad at me for saying it one time. So I don't even know, but I'll just say this. It'd be great when the two best teams in Utah play each other.
Yeah, no, that's something that obviously, and that kind of gets to the appeal, right? Of if we're talking about schools that make sense, Utah does, because the Big 12 just added the school in Utah. Not only they added a school, they added, a religious-based institution, but also one with a lot of good football history.
Yeah.
Well, you've got now the red hot Utah Utes. And I want to mention this too. Like, Utah is, last couple of years, they beat USC twice in the same season. They beat Oregon twice, in the same season. And also too, to go back to the super conference thing, like we just had TCU in the college ball playoff championship. So we're talking about super conferences. I think you're totally right. And I think the one thing though is, if we're doing super conferences, are we like just going to look out for schools that draw? Because the problem is, we just saw TCU make, and here's the thing, 4-team championship. It's like, it's so selective, so restrictive.
Yes.
And they had to go and beat a Michigan. We saw trounce Ohio State, and they led wire to wire. Like, are we going to cut out the Utahs of the world, the TCUs of the world, the schools that we know can succeed at a high level and play in these big games? Are we just going to cut them out? Like, if we go to super conferences? And I think the answer is no. So I feel like Utah in any situation is in good shape. It's just a matter of where you land. And, if you are Utah, you have to think like, okay, as red hot as we are right now, we have to keep going. We have to keep capitalizing. And financially, if we're going to go from wherever they are right now to what, like 25 million? I mean, to me, the gap I was thinking about, and this is just the one that I made up in my head, was 10 million. Because once we start getting to 8 figures, that's a significant gap. I mean, 5 to 6 million for athletic departments is significant. And then you start piling on more money that the Big 12 makes, especially, talk about all the NCAA tournament appearances and how deep those teams go and how much money that makes in bowl games or whatever. like the gap is going to widen between the Pac-12 and the Big 12. And I think schools like Utah need to be cognizant. Now, the one question is, are they a full member in the beginning? I don't know. But down the line, you'd have to think whenever that next television contract comes up, the Big 12 is in 2030, they're in prime position to be a full member and they'll make more money that way, in the long run. So I think there's a lot to balance and for, especially for Utah, who's obviously football's a moneymaker. So, basketball's got some momentum, but football has got so much momentum. Is the Pac-12 the right place to remain, the right place to stay?
I'm so glad I don't have to make that decision, by the way, that I could just cover and talk about it because it is such a complex issue. Because
there's so much that goes into it. There's so much that goes into it.
In terms of like success, I just feel like you're in a good place in the pack. Like you're hitting your stride right now, coming off.
You're winning, right? Why would you want to mess with that? You're winning. Yeah.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like everyone says, right? So I just feel like the momentum they got going on, they know these teams, they know these opponents really well. How would it change to the Big 12? How would that affect their recruiting? Would it still be as good? Would people view them like, oh, they're coming into the new conferences? A lot of times when people change conferences, it's not like the first year usually goes outstanding. Like I think Utah would do well in the Big 12, but I mean, there's obviously going to be losses, and I wouldn't expect Utah their first year in the Big 12 just because of the change in conferences. I think there's years where like this year Utah goes to Baylor. I think it's going to be a fantastic game. That's going to be really hard to win at Baylor too, because I mean Baylor's a really good football team. Right. They're coming off a little bit of a down year under Dave Aranda, but he's a heck of a head coach. I really expect him to turn it around, and I expect that to be a full fist fight. And we don't even know if Cam Rising is going to be healthy for that game. He's coming off an ACL injury, so makes it interesting. But it is really, like I said, it's just really tough to figure out what to do. My heart wants Utah to stay in the Pac-12. But my mind, a lot of it is pointing to, look, the future is so uncertain. For a fact that in the short term, you're probably putting yourself in a better position to get a media rights deal. But also if I go to the Big 12, I don't just want, like I said, if let's say they do the super conference thing and we have 50 teams in it, and let's say Utah gets a chance to be invited into that. I wouldn't like going to the Big 12 for like 2 years and then just leaving to go join a super conference. That just doesn't feel right to me either. But so much of this is what's so crazy, and none of it feels right? It's not going to feel right to see Oklahoma and Texas over in the SEC. It's not going to feel right to see USC and UCLA taking on Rutgers at like 11 o'clock in the afternoon, basically. So it's just going to be all these crazy things, situation in games. Like I said, for me, if I was making the call, I'd want to stick it out with the Pac-12 a little bit longer. But man, the more that comes out about these media rights deals, it gets more concerning, and maybe it is better for them to go down to the Big 12. So it is a really fascinating situation, Josh, and it's amazing just how many layers there are and what goes into it. You get Commissioner Kaliakov like putting out these statements of confidence, which usually statements of confidence, like whatever you have to make, like things are okay.
The old coaching vote of confidence, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, things are not usually okay. That's like Jim Harbaugh these last 2 years. I can't even tell you how much. Look, I know Michigan's enjoyed a lot of success. It would drive me nuts every single season where Harbaugh's like putting out statements like, I'm going to stay. It's like, we're just going to do this year in and year out. It's like, do you want me? Do you not? It's like being in a relationship where someone's not really committed. So it's going to be crazy.
Well, I was saying about that, okay, if you're going to announce that, like just announce that you have a deal, not that, hey, we're working on a deal. Announce when you have a deal. But I think it makes sense. Obviously, yeah, you struggle and they're winning right now in the Pac-12, and they're beating the big dog programs to do so, which obviously is a good feeling. And, you don't want to mess with that. I will say that the avenue, the one big thing that you'd get is the recruiting in Texas would get bolstered, especially when you're going to be playing, you're guaranteed essentially like 2 games in the state of Texas every single year.
Yeah.
Right. There's a bunch of Big 12 schools, obviously, with Tech and with obviously TCU and then Baylor. And then obviously you have Houston in the mix, so you're going to go down there and be playing a lot of games, which obviously is very, very exciting. Quick word from our sponsors. I want to hit on about what Pac-12 what Utah would bring to the Big 12. Today's show is brought to you all by the FanDuel Sports Book. I actually saw FanDuel Sportsbook. They've got some wagers, some lines you guys can place a wager on for next year's games already in college football. Some of those early lines, so you guys can check that out. They've got odds for the NFL draft. It is America's #1 sports book. They have the best interface. For my money, the best interface of any single app out there. So check them out. FanDuel.com/lockedon to get yourself some bonus bets if you all lose on your first bet. Make every moment matter more with the FanDuel Sportsbook. All right. So, what is obviously we hear your appetite, and I think the answer is probably your thoughts are representative of what a lot of fans feel, but what does the fan base have to say about this on the whole? And what is because I think the interesting part, once again, is like, this is not, some giant leap. BYU is going to be making the same, same transition now for them. It's from independent to obviously, the Big 12 for you all be from winning a power conference, winning power conferences to a new power conference in football, at least. So what is the general fan appetite? Is it split? Is it majority one way? What is your vibe on that from your coverage and the fans that you get feedback from?
Glad you said general, because as you know, getting people to agree on anything in completeness on social media is a very challenging task. Right. But I feel like the fan base is split, honestly. I think a lot of people are really excited about the potential of joining the Big 12. I think the one thing that everyone can agree on is they would love playing BYU twice a year like that. That whenever that game happens, it's so great. Just the rivalry in state, everyone talking, going at it. Really, I really think it's outstanding and a lot of fun and one of my favorite things. And one of the things I was really bummed we didn't get this year. I wish we were. And this year I'm excited because you get Florida, Baylor too, like big games that are going to be really cool. But there's something you want to play your rival each year. If they're your rival, and like every year we make Colorado our rival. Now that game has a little extra spice to it, right? Because you got Deion Sanders over there now, and I'm excited to see how that's going to all play out. But yeah, it feels like the fans are very much so split on. I think a lot of them see the value of it in terms of what the media rights deals eventually and all of that could bring into it. And I think a lot of people are like, we're in the pack. We're comfortable in the pack. We've done well in the pack. We're doing well. Like we talked about, ain't broke, don't fix it. So it makes it really interesting. The other point I do want to hit on really quick, though, is you mentioned Texas recruiting. Utah has recruited Texas very well. They had a standout offensive lineman, Braden Daniels, who just got done there. Cam Rising and their new running back, former quarterback, Jaquindon Jackson, were both transfers from the University of Texas, too. So they've recruited Texas well, but to your point, that would only get better with the Big 12 presence in Texas. And you're also even closer to Florida, which, look, Utah has gotten some pull in from California, right? They've done a good job, but you lose a little bit of the California pull, but you can get, look, I played high school football in Texas. I'm going to be biased to Texas, and I'm going to say I want to recruit Texas to the best of my abilities, but you can get Texas and a little bit of a stronger presence in Florida too, just being closer as well too. And with some of the new Big 12 members coming in from Florida too, I think that makes it really exciting. But the fan base in general is, it feels like it's really split on it as people tend to be on social media.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, and you wonder how the recruiting develops, but they're gonna maintain. I think if Utah came to the Big 12, they'd probably maintain. Obviously, we're talking about the four corner schools, so the Arizona connection would be there, right? And Arizona is an area where a lot of people are moving from California, right? So a lot of the talent's going there. There's a lot of talent in Arizona, and you're close enough, and you're playing close enough, I think, to California, to where this is not across the country. I know it's different states, but it's not all the way across the country. And once again, like they've done well with Texas, but there's no substitute for being there more often, right? It cannot, unless you completely screw it up, it cannot hurt. Unless you lose every game you play in the state of Texas, by a ton, and I'm not even sure then it's going to hurt a lot. But it can't really hurt you that much being there more often. And so, I know UCF is there, and obviously Cincinnati and West Virginia, so there is more traveling involved. But, this is the way college, I hate the traveling. I hate the loss of regionality, but I've said this a bunch, and people on my show get mad when I mention my alma mater, but I went to Missouri, and the only thing that Missouri and South Carolina have in common is that they are both in a place called Columbia. Besides that, there's nothing they have in common. Columbia, Missouri, and Columbia, South Carolina are halfway across the country, but those two teams are in the same division, and they made up a rivalry trophy. They have the Governor's Cup or Mayor's Cup, whatever the hell it's called, that they play for every year. That's just the way college football is going, like you mentioned, with USC and UCLA playing at 11 a.m., in College Park or in Piscataway, New Jersey. These are things that we're going to have to get used to. So if it's an 11 a.m. Central kickoff or a noon kickoff at the Bounce House in Orlando, Florida, I doubt that would be the case for Utah UCF game. I think that'd be a bit better time slot, but that so be it, right? And I think the same thing works the other way around. If UCF has to go to Rice Eccles and play a 10 p.m. East Coast time kickoff, so be it, right? Because that's just the way things are going. And also, I think it's pretty exciting. I think that's pretty interesting and pretty exciting if that had to work out. And I just think the number of new matchups too, like these would be a lot of fresh matchups if you think about it. If the four schools that were added plus the Big 12 schools, you just don't see Utah run into them a whole lot, right? And so I think that's kind of, to me, the matchup ideas, especially with how good Utah's been in football recently, just gets me even more excited.
Yeah, Utah playing Baylor each year, going against Tech. There's so many different ones, as you mentioned, too. Utah taking on a program like Cincinnati, too, see what they got going. Houston. There are a lot of fun ones, too. And that's what do those, like I said, this is the part where it doesn't matter as much, right? But like when I say that too, it feels like, man, then no Washington, Oregon at the same time too. Like that also feels weird to think we wouldn't be facing them anymore. But some of those obviously might be coming over too if there was a potential merger too. So it makes it all really interesting. But those new rivalries that could take place, I think could be a lot of fun. And, while you were talking about just like, going in and playing games in Texas, I just remembered when Chase Winovich with Michigan went up to all those, I think it was Ohio State recruits in an Ohio State game, was like, this is why you need to come to Michigan. Like, literally, I don't think like Utah players would do that, but that's just kind of the example. Like, you could do that if you won a game. And like those guys come there to go, let's say, at the Baylor game. And all of a sudden Utah's kicking their butt and they're like, man, look at this Utah program, the position there, and maybe I want to be taking my talents.
Right, and you're going to be going to places like Dallas, where TCU plays. You're going to go Fort Worth, but still, it's like Dallas. It's right. Houston is I mean, I always say this: you look at any SEC roster, you look at any great school roster, they got kids from the Houston area. It's the fourth largest city in America, fourth largest media market, whatever it is in America. They're
hosting the Final Four.
Right. Yeah. They had tons of talent. And to mention the Final Four thing too, I think one part of this, I know Utah basketball is having a nice season.
Yeah.
I think the one thing about the Big 12 too is, well, it's good at basketball, or what's amazing at basketball, and there's loss to be had. Like, it almost gets to the point though where it's going to raise the profile of your basketball program to where like you can't suck. Like you're not going to want to get the crap kicked out of you. And Pac-12 basketball, like the problem is there are a lot of programs that just nobody cares, right? Like nobody cares. I mean, Oregon State had a nice year a couple years ago, but think about, nobody cares about Oregon State hoops. Nobody cares about Washington State hoops. Washington hoops has been down for a while now. Nobody cares about Stanford hoops. Nobody cares about Cal hoops. Nobody cares about Colorado hoops is kind of weird up and down thing. ASU hoops has not been great for a while. They're going to put
Utah.
Teams?
Utah's really struggled recently too. I mean, there's this whole push to open the curtain because they have curtains they shut up top, and they're finally opening up for the California schools. But like, that's just, they don't turn out a crowd. People are very much football focused now. They used to be a basketball school, but that was a long time ago. And
to think about it too, like, I just want to give you an example. Texas Tech. I mean, nobody thinks about Texas Tech basketball, 10, 20 years ago. Yeah. And Chris Beard, don't love Chris Beard, obviously, but Mark Adams is a really good coach. And now all of a sudden, Texas Tech is one of the most difficult places to go in the country. Texas Tech was in last place in the Big 12 for most of the year. And they're on a winning streak right now. They might make the NCAA tournament. And, like that's the level of competition in this league. And I think it's one of those, rising tide lifts all boats. Like, you want to come to the Big 12, and I can guarantee you this is going to happen to UCF. It's going to happen to Houston. Doesn't really need it, but to Cincinnati and to BYU, they're not going to want to get smacked around forever.
But you guys can't smack BYU around, just so you know. Like, that's
right.
Okay.
I think they might be going through it.
That's good.
But eventually, I think the investment's going to come, and so I think from that perspective too. And I know Big 12 wants to make a huge investment in basketball moving forward. It's one of those future sports just because it's a 2-hour. It usually takes around 2 hours. All that kind of stuff. I think there's the opportunity that the Big 12 offers Utah basketball is a very intriguing one.
I definitely agree with that. More high-profile matchups, more TV opportunities, especially their game against UCLA this Thursday is going to be 9:00 Utah time on Fox Sports 1. I mean, that's just like the entire East Coast is obviously. They're not doing it. I know
that's 11 Eastern, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 11 Eastern.
Oh my God.
So you're not getting any East Coast games there versus I was just thinking the other day too, like watching last night's games, like Utah never plays on Tuesdays. Like, it'd be great to get some Tuesday games. That's something that really appeals. And I do think their basketball profile will be raised. I mean, I was at the Final Four a couple of years ago when it was Virginia versus Texas Tech. Like, that was a lot of fun to go out there, check out and see everything. Like, that's the kind of thing it offers, is that level of competition, the talented programs. We've seen how good Kansas State has been this season too. And I think Coach Smith, who's at Utah, former Utah State coach, he led Utah State on a solid tournament run a couple years ago. I think he's a really good coach. And I think a move into the Big 12, I think for basketball, it benefits basketball a lot. Like, I think for football, like I said, I think eventually they, like, maybe 1 to 2 years, and then they're competing for Big 12 championships because that program's in a good position.
Because they're good enough. Yeah, they're good enough to compete. Yeah.
Yeah, but for football, like I said, like, we're already in a great position. Basketball's not. So it makes a lot of sense to move over where, look, maybe those first couple of years, you do get your butt kicked. But eventually, the long term.
You're going to get tired of it, though. And you're going to say,
yeah,
we got to make the right investments, whether it be facilities and recruiting and NIL and all those spaces. Because it's like, football is only 12 games a year. And we are not going to get our tails whipped all the time. And that's what happened. And all of these schools in the Big 12, I mean, there has been, like, I cannot think of one school in this conference that is not making the proper investment to basketball. Now, some individual fan bases might say, well, it's not enough. You're not enough. You're not enough. All of these schools Oklahoma's a bad one. That's just because the fans don't really care, but they're gone anyway. All
Yeah.
of these schools care. They all care that they have currently, and I think the new members are going to have to, right? Because there's a big stretch of the year where there's no football, and do you want to watch your alma mater, your favorite school, get killed? No, you don't. So they'll make the investment, which I think just because the quality of the league, it like you might say, yeah, we'll get killed a bunch, but it's not going to last forever because right-minded ADs and presidents will get wise and put the money into it.
And how many people love March Madness? I mean, it's so many people's favorite sport is college basketball, and their favorite time of the year is March because of the tournament.
Right.
And if Utah could put themselves in a position where they're competing for those things, they're getting in March Madness, they're going on tournament runs again, that's really exciting. And I think it's a great opportunity too, because and we talked about the effect of moving to the Big 12 too. I think for football, like you said, you get maybe 2 games a year for football. Basketball, I mean, you get a lot of games down there. So if you have family in Texas for some of these recruits, it's like, well, maybe none of these other Big 12 schools are offering me right now. Kind of want to stick it to them still by playing with them. And I got family that can come out and watch with me. Utah becomes really appealing when in the past, Utah wouldn't be appealing. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense for them. And like I said, while football, part of me is like, I really like the Pac-12 rivalries we got going on right now. With the position the Utah basketball program is in, and I feel like they're slightly trending up. I mean, look, they had a winless January last season, and they've already won 17 games this season. So, right. And they're going to more than likely get their butts kicked at 9:00, but everyone's going to be asleep, so no one's going to pay attention to that game anyways against UCLA. But I think them going to the Big 12 as part of basketball too. That's one of the things that would get me really excited. For, like I said, football, maybe I'd be a little bummed at first, like, we lost out on some of those other ones. But there's a lot of really talented programs in the Big 12 when it comes to football too. Utah TCU would be really exciting. Like, so I think it's easy to get back on the idea of those things too. And look, whatever Utah does, I feel like if they stay in the pack, I can be like, okay, for football, great rivalries here. Basketball trending up a little bit. If they go to the Big 12, great rivalries in there. Already secured a media rights deal through 2031, I believe, Josh.
2031, yeah.
Yeah, 2031. So security there as well. You don't have to stress about these different things. There's a lot of pros and cons to each side. And as I said earlier, I'm just glad I don't have to make the decision.
Right. All right, JT, where can people find you and your work and all of its variety?
Yeah, so Locked On Utes, we churn out stuff every day. Josh, you actually said earlier you didn't know how long Kyle Whittingham would be going. It's funny enough that just before we jumped on, I just finished up an episode talking about when will Kyle Whittingham retire. So yeah, make sure you guys jump on, tune into that tomorrow to see when one of the current best coaches in the college football landscape is going to end up hanging it up. But Locked On Utes, you can follow me at JT Wistrcill on Twitter. And Josh, this is a lot of fun coming on with you, man.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. Make sure you guys follow him, follow his show, Locked On Utes. Once again, you guys can find Locked On Big 12 wherever you guys get your podcast and on YouTube as well. All right, JT, appreciate it. And hopefully we'll be talking to you again here shortly.
Yeah, very well. Maybe me, Josh.